Okay, in our last video, we went ahead and got the repeating row done. And so now whenever we have a file, it'll appear here in this list. But we now actually have to make each one of these buttons do things. So we're going to start with the easiest button, which is the delete button. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to come over to the left menu here and go to our backend actions. And we're going to create a new action. Let's rename this delete current file. Then we're going to add a trigger of endpoint. And we want to add a input variable of the current file ID. So let's go down over here to query variables. And we're going to choose type of number. And let's label this current file ID. Current file ID. And we'll make sure that that is actually required. And we also want to make sure that this action is only performed by people that are actually logged in. So let's set this authentication profile to basic login. And then let's come over here. We're going to add a variable. And because we're working with a single file and not a list of files, instead of choosing collection, we're going to choose model. We're going to name this current file. We'll select this model of files. And we're going to add a special where clause. So let's click this plus, where ID, which is the ID of the file, is equal to, let's go to our endpoint, and remember that query variable, we're going to choose that one and hit OK. Let's go ahead and choose save. And so now that we have our model done, we're going to add an event. And in this event, what we're going to choose is we're going to choose database requests. And what are we trying to do is we're trying to delete a file from that database that we created. So we'll choose delete here. And then it's going to ask for an object. Well, that object is going to be this current file here that we selected, where it's selecting just the ID. So let's go ahead and hit the plus button here. And let's go ahead and choose our action and current file. Notice here that it says model, and that's how you know, because if you go to endpoint, you'll see that it says it's a current file ID and that's a number. So that's, if you ever get kind of confused, that's how you can check to see what it is. So it's under action, current file, notice it's that type model. And we don't need to choose anything here because we want to select the whole record and hit OK. Hit save. I do like to add a description. So let's say delete current. That way, if you come back a couple months later, you'll know what you're trying to do there. And that's pretty much it for that. So what I like to do is I always like to go ahead and build my code. And now that that code is built, I'm going to go ahead and run that action. Now, when you click run the action, you're going to see you're going to need a current file ID. So let's go to our table and let's click on the files. Now, on this one, we actually have one created here, but if not, you can click this plus icon here, and you can actually put in a test file that you can delete. So you can just choose an attachment and the number, but since I already have that in there, we won't do that. But what we're interested in is, see this ID in the first row? It says 3. Now, don't confuse that with the customer ID. One way you can tell is you try to click and edit that ID, you can't edit it. It's an uneditable field. But this customer ID, now I can edit that. So that's one way that you can tell that you're getting the right ID if they both have the word ID. But typically it's always the first row here, which has the ID of the table, of the row in the table. Okay, so we know that that table ID of that row is 3. So let's go back to our backend action, and we'll put current file ID as 3. And then let's go ahead and run that action. Now we do get a 200 response code, and that looks good. And if we go back to our file it may look like it's still there, but let's go ahead and click over to the users and then click back to files, and you can see that that's actually gone. So you just have to refresh that information from that database. And that looks like our backend action's done. So in our next video, we're going to go ahead and create a front end action and make that button actually delete the file.